sorry, one second, please. Yes. Sorry. Sure. That's okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. No problem. You're the army. Yeah, don't be late. Yes, don't be late. That's fine, Rich. I'm gonna Rich, I'll give you, no worries. No worries. Okay, no worries. Yeah, so, what?
Yes, good, thanks. Yeah, how are you?
No, wait.
Yeah, no. Matt involved you. Matt sent me a message. He's on holiday. Matt sent me a holiday. Panic about you. Yeah, decision. I sent a copy to you. Yeah. Just lay it out on the line. Yeah. So it's clear. Until you've got priorities I'm setting. Yeah. And I've asked him to prepare because I want to understand what you're doing. I know we've got we've got a clear for Elective Capacity. There's another 160,000 people that's coming to the rest of the country. After that, the question is John Law, which I think the man of John funded by this 160,000 regardless of whether that's his loss. That's fine. We can press the button to action we talked about. Yes. Step in. Got the money then. So that's the question we need to answer.
So
the thing for you guys is to get that pipeline. I know that Laura at the university is calculating start that pipeline. You know, I think that's got to go to the other thing is beautiful. You need to talk to team leaders about Southwest Academic Health Science Network. Yes. Back on Wilson next week. Yes. Yes. The priority for me is catering. Yeah. You all see that email. That's what we're doing from Gemma. Yes. Catering program. That needs to be arrested. That's priority one. Yeah. Priority one. Everything else, everything else we talked about, then we can wait until next week.
Southwest Academic got a couple of ideas for that. Interesting enough, we tried to get hold of a couple of people yesterday, some telephone numbers.
hours to be able to do that then can become quite intense. And again, for no fault of any individual organisation at the moment, my wellbeing service has been on a 12-month rolling contract with various organisations, and the CCG brilliantly picked it up when public health couldn't anymore. But it's been on a 12-month rolling contract since I've been in post, which is almost 5 years now. Now, partners have been great and we've kept wonderful work for young people going, but I have to deal with what is effectively institutional abuse on my staff, because 3 months out of every 12, they're wondering if they've got a job or a service to go to in the next few months. And that is, you know, I understand all the structural issues around that, but these people are the people we are asking to hold vulnerable young people in their arms, metaphorically, and we're not treating them well enough. So there's masses of fantastic work going on to do that when can become quite intense. People who show again daily their capacity of any individual organisation at the moment. My wellbeing service has been on a 12-month rolling contract with various organisations, and the CCG brilliantly picked it up. So we know so much I couldn't anymore, but I'll stop. But it's been on a 12-month rolling contract since I've been in post, as I can, or take them away and give you answers another time.
Andrew, thank you so much. That's been really valuable, and actually getting the young person to voice her own perspective was really powerful. A couple of things, and I'll just wait and see whether anyone else wants to contribute. I think just to reflect from, you mentioned people who won't even leave their rooms. I do remember a home visit as a GP, having a consultation through the bedroom door that remained firmly shut. And just how real some of these issues, some of these challenges, and if you're behind your bedroom door, you're a silent voice, and organisations like yours are hugely valuable in making sure that those silent voices are heard. And that strengths-based approach is just such a strong thing. You first of all called them, saying they were a long way from the marketplace. That's anything but a strengths-based terminology, isn't it? Which really just reinforces all of those negative feelings that you were saying that many of the young people have. So thank you, really good, insightful presentation, and struck a chord certainly with some of my experience as life as a GP. Judy.
So I'm Judy, I'm one of the non-executive directors. I wanted to thank you very much both for an excellent presentation, and actually you and your staff for everything you're doing, because it's organisations like yours that bring the whole thing together that give us real insights. I'd also like to thank you for a new phrase that I'm going to use all the time, which is well held while waiting. Because I think that applies not just to young people, but to all of our customers in Devon. And what COVID has done has put us back into this era of waiting, which for many years we had managed to reduce in the NHS. And so the insights of that young woman, but actually your insights too on this whole notion of well held, I think was very helpful. I don't have further questions for you.
Apologies, I'm muted, so those that can't lip read would have completely missed me saying thank you very much, Judy. And Graham's next.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Andrew. I'd reiterate everything that Paul and Judy have said. If I could pick up on one of Paul's phrases, he said, "You've rung a bell." For me, you rung a lot of bells, and I could talk to you all morning. We don't have time for that. One of the lessons I learned from working with young people some years ago was that I was misled initially by what I thought was their confidence and bravado, and they seemed so much more confident than I did at their age. And what I realised was that when I took time to talk to them, actually that was a bit of a front, and beneath that were all sorts of anxieties, and that's come through, I think, in what you've talked to us about. There was also a lesson for me about, the thing about talking to mum or talking to the adult rather than me. It'll be of no help to you to know that happens at the other end of life as well. So that, when I take my 95-year-old mother to the doctors or to a medical professional, they sometimes talk to me instead of mum. And that's a signal of pressured life, isn't it? And trying to communicate as easily as possible. But we need to step back and think about that. I have a family member who works in a similar charity to yours in a large city, and I see him come home absolutely wrung out like a damp cloth at the end of the day. And you made a throwaway remark about being tired and so on. So I'm trying to put this as a question. Other than funding beyond 12 months, is there anything that CCG can do to assist you to look after your staff members as well as your clients, to improve their resilience and well-being? Because without them, you won't succeed, will you?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Graham, and I don't necessarily have an immediate answer, but could come back with a long shopping list, obviously. I think one of the things we've done really well in the last year, so we did the old Sunday Times Best Companies survey, and we were listed as the 47th best charity to work with in the UK 2 years ago. We did it again during COVID and came out as the 8th best charity. So I couldn't put my finger on it, but we spend a lot of time trying to take care of our staff. It then becomes a resource issue. So I think one of the things when commissioners are writing specifications and building service capacity issues, and I know this is a resource issue, is saying, well, where's the resource that as a commissioner, and I used to do commissioning, as a commissioner, I know will just go into building a resilient, skillful, confident staff team, because if I put 10% aside for that at the start, I know that my outcomes are going to be better at the end. Yet, when commissioners build service specs, they build them from the point of, I have got 100 people to see, those people will cost £2,000 a unit, therefore the service price is £200,000. So thinking about that, as well as longer term contracts and so on, and I have to say our wellbeing contract is an abnormality. It's not, I know, how the CCG either normally or wants to work. But yeah, it's a great question, Graham, and one I'm going to go away and think more about.
Thanks, Andrew. And can I apologise, because I said right at the beginning we would introduce ourselves as we contributed, and I started off contributing without introducing myself. So I am Paul Johnson. I'm the chair of the CCG, and as you probably guessed, a GP by background. And then you heard from Judy and Graham, who are both.
Yeah, I forgot. I'm sorry, Paul.
I set the trend, Graham. So I'll hold that one. And we've got 5 people who have got their hands up, so we'll go through them. And then we'll stop after Simon. So can we take let's take Sarah and Alison, if we take it in twos to begin with. So Sarah first and Alison.
Thank you. Andrew, I'm Sarah Wollaston. I'm the Chair Designate of the Integrated Care System for Devon, and just want to back up and say thank you so much to both of you for fantastic presentations and for everything that you're doing. My question is, was that I think you really struck a chord with that difference between the risk-based approach and the strength-based approach. And I just wonder if you could just say to us give us a little bit more detail about what young people, and we all recognise the importance of early intervention and the risk of people becoming much more unwell while they're on waiting lists. What are the interventions that the people who are using your services tell you they would like to be able to access more of, and what should we be focusing our energy on in the future?
Hold that one, Andrew, because I'll take 2 or 3 at a time and then come back to you if that's okay. Alison.
Hi, Andrew. I'm Alison Davis, another non-exec director, but I'm also a social worker very familiar with Young Devon and the work they do. And what I thought I heard you say is that young people don't understand our systems, not because they don't have the capacity to understand health systems and their role in it, but that we don't give them information to enable them to understand what they need to do in any situation and what the processes will be for them. And I just wondered if you could tell us what we could do to ensure that processes are understood for young people.
Excellent. And then just bring in Simon Kerr then, and then I'll come back to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you, Andrew. I'm a GP in East Devon. I've also done quite a lot of commissioning for carer services. Can you just, first of all, can you confirm that you still support young carers? I may have missed that in your presentation. And secondly, I was talking to a teacher friend the other day who was talking about the mental health that they're seeing in the classroom following the pandemic. And she was saying that she teaches in a rather affluent area, and she thinks that hopefully a lot of those children will recover reasonably well because of family support. Could you tell it? Do you share the view that perhaps we should be looking very much more closely at areas where they're less affluent and the potential impact on children long term in those areas because they may not have that family support, particularly following the pandemic?
I hope you did have a pen and paper, Andrew, because there's quite a lot there that has come through. But do you want to do your best thinking on the spot on some of those things?
Yeah, brilliant. So firstly, Sarah, hi, good to see you again. Yeah, what interventions young people are talking about and more access to? So first off, understand my bias. I qualified as a youth worker. I've done 30 years of youth work. I've seen some great investment in youth work in this country during that time. I also saw 10 years where we dismantled an open access young people support system to the value of £1 billion per annum across the country. Something like 800 youth clubs across our country, fewer than we had years ago. One of the things many young people and their parents are saying to us at the moment is they just need somewhere to go to engage with their friends, have some fun, relax. And there are many, and obviously I'm talking about early help now, there are many young people coming through our early help services, and I look at and I think what you're presenting with now, once upon a time, you'd have gone to a youth club every Tuesday night, met with your friends, done some positive activities. It's not just ping pong, it's engaged in a process of informal education, relationship building, neurological strengthening, scaffolding, resilience, all those words. And that's what youth work did. And that's absent now in so many of our communities and for so many young people. So, and I know it might be, you sort of might sit here as a CCG and go, how do we invest in, informal education and early help? But that's what a lot of people are saying. We just need those opportunities to engage in positive strength building activities. So that's one, but take that with my personal bias. I'm a youth worker, so I'm going to say good things about youth work. Alison, your point about processes that we could do to make things more accessible and easier for young people. On one level, that's hard for me to answer because I don't understand a lot of those processes as well. And I think picking up on something Graham said earlier, some young people appear to have confidence, and then when you dig deeper, don't. Actually, in reality, we've all got contextual agency. We feel really confident in some places. All of us might go to a new thing tomorrow and feel really anxious and nervous and lacking in confidence. And young people are the same. So there's something about the ability to communicate things easily and quickly. I'm working with a service, which is not a health service in Plymouth, that have been talking about releasing a leaflet for young people for 6 months. And I had to sit down with them and say, when was the last time you saw a young person read a leaflet? When was the last time you read a leaflet? So some of it is about how we choose to communicate, and the other is the skill to communicate. And often the best thing we did during COVID was got our youth council to do our messaging for young people that we were supporting during COVID, because we were like, let's not go and tell them what we think, you tell them what we think. So it's really complex. There isn't an easy answer to that. I wouldn't pretend there is. But there are processes around talking to and engaging with young people to make that better. Simon, no, we don't directly deliver the Devon Young Carers service anymore. West Bank do. We used to work with them on it. It became too difficult for us to do that alongside in other things. Absolutely, I would mirror your concerns about less affluent areas or less affluent families needing more support. And that's because, again, what we know about stress, epigenetics, the impact on brain development, the impact on early child development of high stress situations, we know that, and this isn't true for everyone, obviously, but there is a higher chance that people in those kind of environments are facing more and more complex stresses, and therefore the impacts on young people are going to be harder. Obviously, let's not hide the fact that young people from affluent areas are also massively struggling for different reasons. I would say, though, again, yeah, absolutely. I think considering how we support those families and those people with concerns, it's not unusual. I've got staff in my housing projects who've worked with us for 20 years. It's not unusual for us to have the homeless child of a parent that they worked with when they were homeless 20 years ago. We still systemically in this country haven't really understood breaking some of those cycles on a large scale. Hopefully that covers those three.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Nick and Simon. So Nick Kennedy first and then Simon Tapley.
Thank you. Good morning, Andrew. Nick Kennedy. I'm the independent clinician on the CCG governing body. My question is about communication with young people. The young person you had on was talking about the difficulty or how communication about waiting lists was really poor and we weren't communicating well in a way that made her feel satisfied with it. I would suggest that we've got quite a lot to learn from young people about how to communicate with them, really. Do you have any suggestions about how we do that? Because as far as I can see, and I'm not a young person, it's a pretty fast moving game in terms of different communication vehicles, if you like. How do we keep up with that? And how do we know that we are engaging with young people in a way that is meaningful to them on an ongoing basis?
Thanks, Nick, and I particularly like your self-insight into determining your age bracket. That was very helpful. Simon, let's take Simon and then back to Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Andrew, you don't need a pen. Don't need to write this down. So I'm Simon Tapley, Deputy Chief Exec, father of a son with Asperger's, a daughter with body image anxiety, and a teenager who thinks he's going to play cricket for England, so will require some picking up, I'm sure, at some stage. He's 16 already, should have grown out of it. So hearing, I'll go to the other end of things. Everything that colleagues have said is absolutely right, Andrew, but what struck a chord for me was the anxiety being caused for your staff and your teams through a 12-month rolling contract. So I've had a quick offline conversation with John Dowell, our Chief Finance Officer, and we will commit to reviewing that and making sure we can give you as long a contract as we possibly can, because that is not helpful. It causes your staff anxiety, you work, and us work. It's just not a good way to do it. And I would like a conversation with you about how we can shift to an outcomes-based contract, because these are the sort of work that you're doing is not an inputs-outputs type of contract. So we shouldn't be looking at how many young people you're going to support and then say you get £1,000 for that. We need to look at the outcomes to give you some a chance for your staff to have some well-being, to have some reflection and decompression time. So I'm more than happy to have that conversation with you, because it's a very valuable service, and we committed yesterday to one of our priorities being a move to preventative work with children and families, particularly around emotional health and well-being. And lo and behold, you crop up today. So it's important that we live true to those priorities that we've agreed. So that if you get my Darren's got my contact details, let's have a conversation and we'll do our best to sort this out.
Thank you, Simon. So I was going to have two asks of us as a CCG, and you've taken one of them in hand already, so that's really helpful. Thank you. So Andrew, just coming back on Nick's point, I guess.
Yeah, so Nick, again, I won't pretend there's an easy answer. If you want to be radical, don't get rid of your current comms team, but create a young people's comms team. Recruit 3 or 4 young people, pay them, support them, train them, put them in charge of your comms to young people, and kick them out every 2 years. And that sounds harsh, but I have an internal design lead. I don't want them to stay more than 2 years. I want to continually refresh because I want to do something different, and I want them to grow and move on to other things, because I also will confess to not being a young person, although inside I never really moved past 15, if I'm honest. I would say that it is constantly changing. There's no simple answer. There's no easy answer. It's not a homogenous group, but recruit some young people and try that.
Thank you.
Simon, I will respond. Thank you. I appreciate your points, and massively thank you for taking on board what I've said. I would also sing the praises of the CCG. When we did our work with public health and public health came to an end, it was the CCG that stepped in and kept this going. So I fully understand the restrictions, and I know the colleagues that we talk to within the CCG, Darren included, are committed to, it's not just about whether we as a charity do it, but whether the voluntary sector can do these things. Thank you. On a final point, I would say a 16-year-old who thinks he can play cricket for England, a couple of weeks ago, Darren and I were discussing whether or not we were going to get a call up at the state of the English cricket team at the moment, so I wouldn't write it off.
That sounds like my conversation every morning, Andrew, during the Ashes.
I'm with you there. So, yeah, thank you.
Andrew, thank you very much. Can I just make one more ask of the CCG, because I know the CCG is currently coming towards the end of our review of the children's and young people services that we commission, and included in that was an engagement period, a 2-week engagement period with children and young people, parents and carers. Can I just ask that rings loud and clear in the output from that, so that their perspective and their input is one of the, if not the, certainly one of the overriding drivers in what we do moving forward. I think that would be respectful, given what we heard from that young person who spoke to us earlier. Andrew, thank you very much. Andrew, thank you very much for your time, and that's been hugely valuable, and we do look forward to continuing working with you for a long time to come.
Thank you. And again, just firstly, thank you for having me, and also to you as a group, thank you. You know, the job you have overseeing these services in Devon is extremely challenging, and I know the commitment and time and energy that you all put in. So thank you for doing the roles you do as well. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Thank
Cheerio.
you. Okay. Let's move on to item 3, which is really just to focus on the apologies. And we've got apologies this morning from Joe Tell, Nick Ball, Steve Brown and Andrew Millwood, but Piers Tetley is deputising for Andrew. And can I just highlight that Jane Milligan, Simon Tapley and myself will have to step out at 11:30 if we haven't finished the public governing body by then. But Graham has very kindly said that he will continue to chair the meeting from that point. We've got the register of interests written down within the packs. Are there any that we need to add or yes, Simon, thank you, and John Dow will have to step out as well. Are there any others that we need to add or adjust for anyone? And are there any conflicts of interests specific to the items on the agenda that people need to raise? And then let's go through the minutes of the last meeting. So in fact, I've got the minutes from, because we didn't meet in December, so from the 25th of November. So this is for accuracy, page 1 and 2, page 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. So we'll take those as an accurate representation of the governing body held in November. Thank you. We only have one action. John, this was to share the system 21-22, the H2 operational budgets with the governing body. Just checking as we're coming to a close of H2 in just a few weeks' time. Did that go out? Do you know?
Yes. Paul, sorry, John Dowell, I'm Finance Director. Yes, the budgets are included in the finance report that's in the papers today.
Okay, great. Okay, then thank you very much. So we can close that one. Thank you. The next item is the clinical chairs report. I don't have anything to add that isn't already within either the accountable officer's highlights or the other reports that we are getting through. So unless anyone wants to raise anything, then I'm very happy to move straight on to the accountable officer's report. Okay, Jane.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, I'm not going to delve into it. Things are continuing to progress in relation to the ICS. Obviously, I think the bill is now with the various committees, which will be taking on board all of the input from the Lords. And so we haven't yet, I'm not sure I have seen any amendments come through yet. I'm looking at Simon to see whether he's nodding or not. No. So we continue. We had a very helpful meeting with regional colleagues just to go through our sort of our timelines and our plans and approach, and we were given a pretty good bill of health from that perspective. They're very comfortable about the approach that we are taking. We have been interviewing, continuing to interview for the non-execs, and within the paper we've got 3 who we have confirmed, and hopefully in the next week or so we will be able to confirm the 2 remaining non-execs who we have interviewed this week. Then just moving forward, just to say, I suppose, yeah, again, COVID is fast moving and it seems to be still with us, as a lot of us will know at the moment. But I suppose the other thing to say is that, you know, obviously our vaccination programme continues, and I'm not sure whether Darren will pick it up later, but we you know, obviously continue to roll that out for increasingly younger age group. But the key thing now will be looking to put in place a business as usual process for vaccination and boosters as we go forward, and as much as possible align that with flu and other vaccinations. Just to also say, obviously a big focus, and the reason why the reason that Paul and John and Simon and I are jumping off later is that we are meeting with Elizabeth O'Mahony and her team to talk about the Devon plan, which will be obviously our focus on recovery, but actually also on our longer term plan. So that's where everyone's attention is at the moment. I think it's fair to say we are doing what we can to help support the decompression or the stabilisation of the acute setting or acute system, because we're going to struggle to focus on elective recovery whilst pressures are still high. But it's fair to say, even though COVID levels are dropping and staff sickness levels are improving, we're still seeing days of immense pressure. So that continues to be a focus, and quite a lot of work happening with support from national and regional colleagues on what more can we do in relation to how we work with SWAST, but actually also in relation to discharge as well. I know Simon's been particularly involved in that with other colleagues. And then the last couple of things is it is LGBT History Month this month, and we've got a webinar on Monday. Not quite sure what that entails, but I'll certainly be there for that. So great opportunity to say celebrate and to thank people, everybody actually in that space. And then lastly, I always like to pick up a few sort of award recognitions. So we're showcasing another charity, another Devon-based charity, which is West Bank, which has just won the Queen's Award for Voluntary Services, which is a really fantastic accolade. So that was all I had to cover.
Thanks very much, Jane. Graham.
Thank you, Paul. I'm Graham Turner, a non-exec director for finance and remuneration, and thank you, Paul, for covering so gracefully for me earlier when I forgot to introduce myself. Jane, a question about the integrated care system development and transition. I think I read that one of the recommendations from the Lords, which has been taken on by the government, is to allow local authority councillors to be on the board of the ICB, which was something which was not in the legislation previously. I wondered if there'd been any more clarification about that and how they might then slot into the structure that we've already determined and are recruiting for.
So my understanding is that the proposal, which again I think probably has yet to be ratified, is that previously it had been, as I say, council members could only be executives, but now they are saying that they can be executives or, as you say, councillors. I think it's a recommendation. I'm looking to Simon because he might be a bit more up with it than I am. I'm now struggling to know what the latest is.
No, you're right. So it's we've not had any further guidance, Graham. It is a recommendation. So at the minute we are looking to move with our original plan. But if the guidance comes further than a recommendation and it becomes a requirement, then we'll obviously have to think again. I think our local authorities in informal conversations so far have been happy to stick with the plan that we originally had, but we'll need to wait for further guidance, I think.
Yeah, and Sarah's hand up as well. As I think Simon's right. It's at the moment there's no massive appetite, but as you can imagine, Graham, in other parts of the country, this is causing quite a lot of anxiety. But Sarah.
Yes, just to clarify, it's just before, Graham, it was an absolute exclusion that you couldn't be an elected member, and now it makes it a possibility. But there's also some uncertainty because we're now being told that for the partner members, we have to wait for the ministerial regulations to have been laid before we can formally announce who those members are. So it is to a certain extent difficult because the ground is slightly moving beneath our feet, and we're not sure of the exact date when those regulations will be laid, but that is the position. And as others have said, we don't think locally there's going to be a huge pressure for us to rerun that process, but we can't be certain, and we can't prejudge it until the regulations are laid. I hope that's made it a bit clearer.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful.
Thank you, Sarah, and I think that just shows that we've got to continue with our plans and press on with our plans, but aware that there will be timings and changes that we may have to adapt to as they come through between now and July. Then, won't there? Glynis.
Yeah, hello, Glynis Atherton, non-exec member for the CCG. Jane, thanks very much for your report. It's really comprehensive. I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about the development of provider collaboratives, because I know this board is very enthusiastic about an acute provider collaborative in Devon, and as to where we've got with that. And I wasn't quite clear what you meant about complexities with partner member selection. And my other question really was slightly about West Bank and whether we can scale that up, because it sounds like a fantastic project.
Sure. Well, picking up West Bank first, yes. I mean, I think certainly from my perspective, you know, I'm still relatively new, so still getting to hear about lots of good organisations. So I think certainly it would be good to. I'm happy to pick that up. I don't know if we've still got Darren on the call with us, but we'll look into that. In relation to the provider collaborative, I think so things are continuing to move at pace. And my understanding, as I say, we're still working. So for the acute provider collaborative, the boards, I think, met earlier this month and are, as I say, working still to take through the sort of private and public boards. So by the end of March, we get to a position of having an agreement to have a committee in common. And that really will be the place where we can work or certainly get decisions made as a acute provider collaborative on, you know, some of our sort of strategic areas, such as our response to the elective recovery programme. So I think at the moment, unless anyone tells me otherwise, that you know will move forward. So we'll know a little bit more once the next so February boards, I think, well, we're either this week or early. I know UHP's boards next week. So all moving forward. And of course, in terms of the provider collaboratives, as part of that is, of course, is the others, which includes children and families, as well as mental health, who are more established. But I think it's fair to say, you know, recognise we've still got more work to support them. And I know, so the local care partnerships, further work and more work to be done in terms of, you know, how they're going to work as well. But certainly, I think really helpful step forward in terms of getting the acute provider collaborative to, you know, moving forward. So progress continues.
Thank you.
Simon.
Yes, thank you, Jane, very much for your report. You mentioned anti-vaccination activity in your report, and I was lucky enough to have a paper arrive on my desk last week from that campaign, which was really quite threatening. And I just wonder how much we've done to support colleagues in primary care and other organisations to be confident that they're doing the right thing in the presence of these papers that we're receiving in our paperwork. Thank you.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, Darren might want to comment because he and I have had a number of conversations. I know, Sarah, you've also offered, if not have spoken to some of the teams on the ground, because, as you say, quite threatening in all kinds of ways. So, Darren, I don't know, do you want to just pick up? You'll know more about the latest than I will.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Jane. And I think when we know about the reports, we do do everything we can to support. Because as I say, you say, Simon, these are very threatening letters. They feel very personal and actually make you question quite a lot around the elements, even though you absolutely fundamentally believe clinically those are the right things. So I know, Sarah, you've had a number of conversations with individuals that have been served letters, and obviously the anti-vaxxing activity is definitely increasing. So we have a system in place called an SPAR system. So I have a designated person within the vaccine program that reviews those elements. So if it hasn't been reported, so I'm really keen that that is reported, and we'll make sure that we get that message back out through the primary care webinar tomorrow, because I think it is very much, we've got a process there. We support, ultimately we do link very closely with the police, because ultimately quite a lot of this does also then result in criminal activity as well. So we've got a lot of support. So we have a robust process, but say if you can let us know, we'll make sure that you get the team get the support that they quite rightly deserve, because they are, as even though you believe fundamentally the right things, having received those letters directly myself and a number of emails, they do make you question and challenge and feel quite uneasy about the process.
And it may be that it's gone to all GP practices this week, so I just think we're good to get something out in the webinar tomorrow. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll get that sorted.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
So the next item 8.1, the integrated performance and quality report. So Darren, that's still with you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I will draw the governing body's attention to a few points, and I'll pick up on a couple of specifics that Jane referred to in her accountable officer's report. I think it's fair to say that the report is still growing in maturity, but we're having good conversations, detailed conversations through subgroups of the governing body, so obviously through quality, finance, performance, etc. Happy to take any questions, but in terms of the high level probably areas to draw the governing body's attention to is infection prevention control, as we would expect, is continue to have a significant impact on performance across all parts of the pathway, and obviously despite with the unlocking and changes in national guidance, we still continue to see a large number of individuals presenting in all parts of our service with COVID, but ultimately in terms of inpatient areas, we're still well in excess of 150 patients across Devon, and the impact that has on the wider flow. I think it's fair to say that we have talked about COVID for the last 2 years, but in terms of wider infection control, we are now seeing other seasonal viruses starting to have impact as well. So such as norovirus, and we have had a number of ward closures in January and February as a result of other seasonal illnesses that have infection control challenges. Vaccinations remain exceptionally positive across Devon. We continue to see good uptake. We are now at 86% of all eligible individuals have had a booster, so first, second and third doses. And we continue to see good uptake even in first and second doses at this time. We're still seeing 200 to 300 or actually 400 on days, individuals coming forward for their first and second doses. So that is a good position to be in. Obviously, we are moving towards younger age groups. So we know that we've been vaccinating clinically extremely vulnerable 5 to 11-year-olds. And obviously now the national guidance is to extend that to all 5 to 11-year-olds to be offered a vaccine, which will start from early April, and then in the spring a further opportunity for boosters for over 75s and the most vulnerable individuals in older persons care homes. So we continue to build that success on the vaccination programme. I think it's also fair to say that we still see some challenges in certain areas, and we've talked quite a lot this morning around deprivation and pockets of challenges around equity of access. So we are still seeing about the gap has closed, but we're still seeing about a 6% variance between areas of Plymouth and Torbay and the wider Devon area. That has closed from a 10% gap, but seeing improvements, and we'll continue to work in those particular areas. Obviously, as a result of COVID, we also saw a sustained and increased level of staff absences. That is now improving slowly, but we're still about 2% above where we were pre-pandemic, and the feeling is now that that's probably going to be a new norm. We are working in terms of particularly around health and wellbeing and supporting staff elements in terms of those absences, but it is an improving picture. But I think it's fair to say that we'll see a continued increase in absences as a result of the challenges that we're seeing at the moment. Moving on to urgent emergency care performance, I think it's fair to say it has remained exceptionally challenging, and at capacity pretty much through December, January and into February. And that has had a massive impact on all of our metrics, but particularly in terms of hours lost from an ambulance point of view, 111 abandonment. Although we have seen some really positive improvements in our out of hours services, so that is definitely an improvement in those particular areas. So it's worth noting those. But I think probably the area to note, that in January we saw over 6,000 hours of operational time lost due to long waits in our ED department, and there have been huge amounts of work in that area to reduce and mitigate some of those. But clearly much more work to be done, and we'll continue to work with our regional and national colleagues in that space. Elective capacity, again, as a result of the urgent emergency care, that has continued to be exceptionally challenged with minimal elective procedures undergoing through January. So we do significantly remain off plan and has further deteriorated in January. But we are now very much focused on our recovery plans and recovery metrics, and we will make that much stronger in the ongoing report. And probably just to note, in singling out, we also saw a deterioration in our 2-week cancer wait during January as well, but a slight increase and a slight improvement in our diagnostic performance. So an area to monitor there. Then moving on to discharges, I think again, Simon's been really leading quite a lot of work around discharges. I think that's been exceptionally challenged, to the point where we've probably pretty much maintained our position despite huge amounts of work, care hotels, additional capacity. But we do continue to see a large amount of challenges around our delays or clinic criteria rights to reside, and that will continue to focus, because ultimately opening up and unlocking some of those challenges will help in terms of the urgent emergency care challenges, and most importantly the elective and the consultations and conversations and engagement around our protected elective capacity. Continuing the theme, mental health has again remained exceptionally challenged through the period. We're now consistently around 104-105% occupied within our mental health services, with a large number of individuals being supported effectively within the community. And we are again starting to see those numbers continuing to increase sustainably, as we predicted, as a result of the pandemic and the next phases of moving to an endemic stage. So again, that theme around capacity continues to be high. Challenges around children and young persons, and I think we've heard very eloquently from Andrew around those particular challenges. And I know, Chair, you alluded to the fact that we've got the children and young persons report to be published shortly, so I probably won't go into any more detail in that space at the moment. Primary care, again, performance has been exceptionally challenged through January, but actually what we have seen is a significant increase in experience, so positive increase in experience from an access and from a digital perspective. So I think credit that as despite the exceptional challenges from a primary care point of view, individuals are starting to report some significant improvements in the experiences that they're seeing from an access and digital point of view, from a primary care perspective. And then last but not least, our vacancy rates across the entire workforce continue to increase. That seems to be very significant in terms of, as a result of the pandemic, a large number of individuals chose to defer their retirement, and potentially age profiling, etc. That is now resulting in those individuals taking the opportunity to retire. So we are now averaging about 12% vacancy absences, which is about 3% above where we were pre-pandemic, and looking at the moment intention trajectories that's likely to increase to about 15% across all areas. But that's probably the areas I want to draw the governing body's attention to, Chair, but happy to take any questions on that point.
Thanks, Darren. Sheila.
Thank you, Chair. Sheila McCormick, clinical representative from the Western locality. So Darren, there was one little snippet of good news that I picked out of your excellent, as always, report, which was the breast cancer conversion rate being in line with national and with pre-pandemic levels as well, so around 11%. I feel that's something that is worth alerting general practice to, for two reasons. Firstly, that I think it does provide some reassurance. It also provides some reassurance to the public, and I certainly would find it very reassuring to know that we appear to be picking up the same numbers as before. Yeah. We could have a conversation about what the right number is. I don't think we know, do we, what the right number is? So the fact that we're maintaining that, I think, is worth celebrating. I also wondered whether we know that for other cancers, because I think that might be some helpful information, certainly for general practice to know. Yeah. And then can I tack on another question as well, which is sort of broadly linked, but only very broadly, which is around the push to protect our elective capacity. And I know that we are prioritising orthopaedic and ophthalmological surgery, ophthalmic surgery. I just would like some assurance that gynecology is not going to be overlooked for the obvious reason of equity and equality. But also, I guess what I'm asking is, there will be some women who are waiting for surgery who are actually being, I'm thinking of a case that I knew of a while ago, waiting for a hysterectomy who required recurrent admissions for blood transfusions. Now, that I'm basically seeking assurance that we've done a QEIA on our decision making, so that we aren't making sure that the clinical situations of patients in the waiting list is not being pushed aside, and that we're not just prioritising bums on seats. Thank you and apologies for the long-windedness.
No, that's absolutely fine. Thanks, Julia. So I think in terms of your first two comments, yeah, absolutely, we'll look at how we communicate effectively with primary care around, as you say, quite rightly, the good news around breast care. And I think, if I'm honest, I think there's a bit of work to be done around a number of the other site specifics to have that same level of granularity. So we will work on that over the next couple of reports, and again, make sure that we can communicate that in a clear way around where our performance is. But John, I know you're holding the ring on the protective elective care, so I'm not sure you want to just come back in on Sheila's comment around the equity.
Yeah, so John Finn, I'm the Director Commission for Urgent Elective Care. So it's a good challenge, Sheila. So in terms of all the work in terms of the protective elective care to date has focused on the greatest opportunity for the high volume, low complexity work, which is orthopedics and ophthalmology. That doesn't mean that in terms of not having done the capacity planning modelling for gynae. So I said that work didn't indicate actually that we would have capacity gaps over the next 1, 2, 3 years. The opportunity in gynae again in high volume, low complexity is moving the majority of our procedures to day case, by which we would increase capacity. But I said happy to to have a conversation in terms of the decision making around ophthalmology and orthopedics, but it certainly doesn't mean that we're not prioritising the appropriate capacity of a gynae going forward.
Thank you. So to answer my specific question about a quality equality impact assessment on our plans, has that been done and will it be done?
It has been done for the process to date, which involves ophthalmology and orthopedics. Yes, it has.
Okay. So we haven't done it in the round then for different groups of patients.
The process got us to ophthalmology and orthopedics. Gynae wasn't part of the discussions in terms of being a priority for a separate site for high volume, low complexity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's take them in pairs, Simon and David, and then Alison and John. If I can draw a line under that, just so that we can keep moving. But Simon Kerr first.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thank you, Darren, very much for a very comprehensive report. I just wanted, my main question was about care homes. Your figures demonstrate what we know is that we are seeing outbreaks in care homes of this Omicron variant. What I would like to be assured about is are we confident we've got infection control management to a good enough level? If we had a much more virulent or a vaccine resistant variant coming through now, would we have been in a better position than we were originally? That was my main question, but my other comments are I think we're doing really well. If we can achieve a reduction in the out of area mental health patients, that will be a fantastic achievement if we get there. That's mentioned in your report. And just to come back on appointments in primary care, your diagram which shows numbers of appointments, doesn't seem to reflect the massive growth in the e-consults that we're putting in, and talks about we're not quite back to face-to-face appointment levels. The facts are we are handling huge amounts of telephone consultations and e-consults, which is all additional capacity that doesn't seem to be reflected in your diagram as much as I would like. But otherwise, thanks for a great report.
Thanks, Simon. And David.
Yeah, so it's just really a plea about mental health statistics. I'm spending an increasing amount of my time dealing with rejected mental health referrals. So I would say, as a sort of brief audit of referrals in the practice, somewhere between a third and a half of referrals are rejected for various reasons, normally because they're not hitting the threshold. And I just really like to make a plea that in the post lockdown world, where mental health problems are definitely increasing, where we've got huge problems with severe anxiety, the sort of problems we were hearing about earlier, that most of these, or between a third and a half of these referrals, feel locally as if they're being rejected by mental health services. And I'd really like to see that on this report, proportion of referrals rejected, because I think that gives a really good feel for how pressurised mental health services are. Apart from the fact that it generates huge amounts of work throughout the system, because when a referral is rejected, the only person who tells the patient and explains why it's been rejected is the GP. So it gets passed back to the GP to have another consultation with the patient, explaining why they're not going to get any help from the mental health services. So I'd just like to see that figure in this report.
Darren, do you want to
Thanks, David.
Two items,
yeah,
and then we'll take Alison and John.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, David. Thanks, Simon. So I think, yeah, absolutely. We start with the mental health. So I think absolutely I will look at a number of other metrics. We have got a number of other metrics in the background that we can build in. And I think you're absolutely right. That whole referral and then, yeah, the element is a bit that we need to pull in. So absolutely we'll look at bringing that in for the next meeting. And I agree, Simon. I think, you know, it feels like we're in a positive position around and an improving position around the out of area, because that is absolutely significant, and from a patient experience point of view is really, really key. I'll also look at the metrics in terms of some of the activity. So again, I'll go back to the team and make sure that we are building in all of the metrics so that it shows a complete picture if there are areas that are being excluded by some of the searches at the moment. So I'll absolutely look at that particular area and ensure that we feed back at the next meeting. And then finally, your comments around care homes, and I think it's fair to say that, yeah, the care home market has had exceptional challenges over the last 2 years. I think, you know, the CCG had some real foresight almost, well, right at the start of the pandemic, and invested in community infection control teams. So we have a number of system resources that are working very collaboratively with our care homes. We're also working with our local authority quality assurance teams, so the Quate teams, to make sure that we build a package around. Also a lot of education, and also making sure things like supplies, so appropriate supplies and those sort of things. So it does feel like, yeah, shall I say, yeah, everything is perfect? No, it's not. We can always do more. We can always support our care home colleagues more effectively and always do more in that particular space. But I do feel relatively assured in terms of the knowledge in the particular market and the level of support that we have, particularly in our outbreak meetings, you know, and they have been exceptionally large numbers. So at the moment, we're still at about 150 homes across Devon in outbreak. So having that forensic support and review, you know, is obviously quite labour intensive, but absolutely the right thing to do.
Okay. Thanks very much, Darren. Alison and then John.
Thanks, Paul. Darren, two things from me. In your outcomes report, you've referred to alcohol-related admissions to hospitals for under 18s, and that Torbay is twice the national average. And you've said very helpfully that the alcohol harm reduction working group are working on it. But we also have had figures in the past, particularly for Torbay, of high levels of homelessness and NEETs, not in education, employment and training, for young people in Torbay. So I wanted reassurance that we're taking a holistic approach to young people's problems in Torbay and not doing it in a silo approach of just focusing on alcohol. And then secondly, it's my usual concern about the autism waiting lists. Despite being told they would come down, the mean waiting time is still 18 months for an assessment, and I had hoped we'd see improvement by now.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Thanks, and then John.
Thanks, and a quick question around the Nightingale unit that may be for you, John Finn, rather than Darren. And it's just that we are focusing on orthopedics and ophthalmology, which makes a lot of sense. Are we checking that we're not creating a geographical inequity because this sits in Exeter? And can we just check that we don't find that the patients in South Devon and North Devon and in the West are being disadvantaged by having to travel so far and just saying, no, we don't want to go there. So there could be a hidden equity developing over the time. Can we just check that?
Yeah, so John, is again really good challenge. I think in terms of equity of access, I think it's we need to look at the waiting list size in RD&E compared to the other trusts. So we're just actually doing this piece of model at the moment, actually for the chief executives next week. In terms of the waiting list for ophthalmology and orthopedics is significantly greater for the population of East Devon compared to the rest of the population. So initially, the Nightingale will focus on treating East Devon patients actually in order to ensure we have equity of access. But the learning in terms of the Nightingale will bring further involvement from our clinicians in, let's say, UHP and South Devon. So they're operating in that. So it will give the population of UHP and South Devon a greater opportunity to use that facility. But in summary, no, the greatest need in terms of access for ophthalmology and orthopedics is in East Devon, and this will bring this down over the next 9-12 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. And anything back from you, Darren?
Yeah, so if I just pick up on Alison's comments, so you're absolutely right, Alison. I think I was going to mention the alcohol, so thanks for the prompt on that particular challenge. And I think if we look at alcohol in isolation, then we absolutely missed the point. And Lincoln might want to come in, particularly around any other elements around Torbay. So this has to be looked in the round. I think also, though, that the hospital admissions around alcohol are quite interesting to look at Devon-wide as well, because I think if we have got particularly a hot topic or hot spot in around Torbay, which we probably do understand a little bit more around because of deprivation, because of other elements. But I think what we're also seeing is there are very similar challenges, some of our more rural and remote areas. So I think there's as I talked through at Finance and Performance a couple of weeks ago, there's a piece of work that we need to do, particularly around the alcohol, to really understand that from a system point of view, but potentially, absolutely right around the inequalities that we need to work on, but within localities. I see Lincoln's hands come up, and absolutely, Alison, we don't want to go without acknowledging the fact that absolutely we are equally disappointed with the, despite the autism wait with trajectories and plans in place, it has pretty much marked time rather than seen an improvement. But Lincoln, did you want to
come in on that?
Yeah, thanks. Since you invited us, so I agree with you. Alcohol, I think, in Torbay has probably slipped down the agenda. And one of the things, my next annual report this year will focus on alcohol and picking up some of those issues. We are in Torbay in the process of reprocuring our multiple complex needs service, which will pick up issues with substance misuse. So that's an opportunity there of ensuring that we're looking at some of those pathways. We're also doing some work, particularly the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, around Castle Circus and some of the issues of place and alcohol with antisocial behavior and so forth. We have a subgroup meeting this afternoon on that. So it is rising up the agenda. And I think when you think about the cross connections with children and young people's emotional health and well-being and so forth, we're beginning to find several hooks where we can make sure that the profile of alcohol is raised and addressing your issues, Alison. While I'm talking, I was going to pick up IPC. Again, the region really appreciates the work that we've been doing collectively to support care homes. We expect that there will be some focus again when immunity begins to wane the fourth jab of over 75s will help to mitigate, but it is almost inevitable that we will face another challenge to care homes. And I think that joint working of community infection control, social care teams, others going in and supporting hands-on has really made a difference. I want to plea again, we're funding the community infection through the prevention pot. No problem with that, but the prevention pot was meant to be temporary. It's meant to be pump priming for lots of other things. So we need to mainstream that funding and ensure that it goes into the relevant baseline and is set so that we don't lose that capacity, and allow the prevention pot then to begin to identify some new areas.
Thanks very much, Lincoln. Thank you, Darren and John, for your contributions as well. Can I just do a sense check? We are running 20 minutes over, which, considering we're only just over an hour through the meeting, is quite something from my chairing, so apologies. But do people want a quick 5 minutes? We've got a couple of decisions we definitely need to make before part of the team go off to the regional meeting. But if I see enough nods and thumbs up, we'll take 5 minutes. Yeah, there's enough of those. So can we come back? Let's make it 4 minutes, because then that's a nice round 10:50 that we restart.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to freshen up. John, can I ask you to take us through items 8.2 and 8.3, please?
Yep, thank you, Chair. So I'll move fairly swiftly through the introduction so we can get on to any questions, but just a reminder for people watching in that this is the finance report for the period to the end of the 31st of January, so month 10 of the financial year, but the financial regime that we've been operating in as an NHS through the pandemic has been in 6 monthly instalments, really. So this is period 4 of H2 of the 21-22 year. In the executive summary, which is on page 100 of the papers, just a reminder then that we have been in receipt of significant additional resources, i.e. additional to what we would have had in a pre-pandemic period, just set out there. Funding targeted at elective recovery and dealing with the impact of the costs driven directly by the pandemic. So with the benefit of those additional resources, as a CCG and as a wider health system, we were able to deliver balance in the first half of the year and set a plan for the second half of the year, which is also overall balance for the system. And within that, the CCG planning for a small surplus at £5.3 million. And this report confirms we remain on target to deliver that surplus of 5.3 million. In section 4 of the report, the sort of key indicators, financial indicators there that we've got show a positive picture, all green against the things that we have to monitor ourselves against and report through to NHS England. Section 3 of the report then sets out financial performance against each of the budgets. So picking up the action from the action log at the start of the meeting, and there's explanation in the report of the variances such as they are against those budgets. The last thing I was going to mention, just to tie this into the next item then, is that within our overall financial position and year-end forecast, we have incorporated the payments that we expect to make to our local authority colleagues using Section 256 powers of the Health and Social Care Act. And we'll go on to talk about those in more detail at the next item. Other than that, Paul, nothing I need to say by way of introduction, but very happy to pick up any questions.
Any questions for John on that financial position? Okay, that's great. Thank you, John. Now, the next item, just for noting, the cover sheet for the funding transfer agreements does say that it hasn't been to any committees prior to coming to governing body. Now, I'm aware, I've spoken to Graham, that it has actually been through Finance Committee. So that's just an error in the documentation. And I think that's just helpful that it's had that extra level of scrutiny and assurance before coming to governing body. But John, did you want to talk us through that item then, please?
Yes, thank you, Paul, and thank you for picking that up. Sorry, that just to confirm this, that this was certainly discussed at length at Finance Committee, and comes here with the recommendation of Finance Committee that the payments are approved. They are coming to governing body to seek approval as part of governance. The authorisation process in our scheme of delegation and so on requires express governing body approval for these agreements and for these payments to be made. The executive summary of this report then just sort of sets out a bit of context about what a Section 256 is and the powers that that gives us to make payments in the form of grants to local authority colleagues for spending on services that are best done through that route. But as the agreements themselves sort of set out, this is very much targeted at improving flow essentially through through health services by making investments in intermediate care and things which either help to keep people out of hospital or lend themselves to speedier discharge. And some of the issues that we're experiencing in terms of current performance and particularly exacerbated by the pandemic has seen a lot of money flowing through the health service to be targeted at dealing with those issues to help us keep the hospitals as clear as possible to deal with people that need to be there. So there has been a lot of money, an exceptional amount of money really coming through through that particular route, and the number of Section 256 agreements that we're presenting today, I think, sort of reflects that, but also speaks extremely well to integrated care and the purpose of it, and sort of what our strategic direction is and will continue to be. I would make a slight distinction between the nature of some of the agreements here. You can see some of them are quite general in their construction, and some of them are quite specific. So we have also received some allocations for some quite specific things, where again the route to payment for that is best achieved through a local authority. That's why those are enshrined in these particular agreements. So again, I think that's probably all I need to say by way of introduction. I'm sure there will be some questions, so I will pause at that point and pick up from there.
Thanks. I'll bring Judy in a minute. And Graham, I was going to bring you in just as chair of the Finance Committee. Just if you could highlight where you got to in your review of this, and whether there were any things that you wanted to bring to governing body's attention as the finance chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I really would just want to endorse what John Dowell has said. This partnership approach to working absolutely aligns with the move towards more integrated working between health and social care, and it's absolutely the right policy move to make. We did discuss the detail at the Finance and Performance Committee and had the benefit of having our external auditors with us at that meeting. Colleagues might recall that last year the similar 256 arrangements were subject to some discussions with auditors. We're again having those discussions with the auditors just as we finalise the arrangements. So what I would hope today is that the governing body can approve the recommendations subject to those discussions with the auditors just being finalised by John and his team.
That's great. Thank you very much, Graham. Judy.
Well, I would like to very much support approving these. I think this new flexibility that we're seeing through these ways of working that bring health and social care and voluntary sector care implicitly through these agreements are great. I notice measures that are used in each of the agreements, and they're given as mostly as examples of measures we will use. John, we've been doing this for a year. Can you tell me how we have been ensuring over the last year that we get value for money from these? So I'm not asking you to go through each one in detail, but what's our executive process for using some of those measures to be sure that the way these flexible funds are being used?
Yep, certainly, Judy. So the process we use is is by taking the KPIs that are set out in those agreements and assembling the data and taking them through an executive review. It is fair to say that because of the sort of slightly constrained system that we've continued to work in over the last 12 months, we've not deployed as much of the resource in last year's Section 256 as we may have anticipated. So the process that we have will continue to be used as those resources start to get rolled out. What we've discussed as an exec team, Simon, I notice has got a hand up and may want to come in, is, you know, this does feel like really good territory for local care partnerships to be involved in the review of the value for money of that. So through our locality directors in particular as being the sort of pivotal link on that, that's where we would expect the focus of attention to come. I think the last thing I would say on that is it was noted in the governance and the observations from the discussions that we had with auditors last year that Graham mentioned, that it would be wise to take something back through our audit committee on that. So we would certainly expect to report on value for money through audit committee.
Thanks very much, John. And you must have got it right, because Simon's hand up turned into a thumbs up. So thank you. We've got Nick, David and John. If we take those three, and then we'll come to the recommendation that we've been asked to support. Nick.
Thank you. 2 points. One, Graham sounds very confident that the auditors will be happy with the Section 256 agreements. I guess the question is, how confident are we that they will be approved, and what happens if they're not? And the second question is sort of building on what Judy was just saying about monitoring it. Are any of these going to be subject to a QEIA process so that we can get some idea of the impacts?
Hold that one, John. Let's just take David and John and then do the three together.
Yeah, I was just going to say I hugely support this type of arrangement. My question really is about, in the parts of Devon that have a truly integrated health and social care system, are the arrangements any different? Because where we are managing the or the healthcare is managing social care for adults, does that alter the arrangements, or is it on paper, is it the same?
Okay, and then John Walmsley, and I suspect Simon is responding to some of those questions, so between Simon and John maybe can come in and cover the points. John.
Okay, thank you. So I completely support this way of working. I'm a huge fan, and I'm chair of One Northern Devon, which is a collaboration between health and social care and the voluntary sector and other members of our team. Can I just remind people what Andrew Mormon said earlier on, which was, and he used the frame institutional abuse. So my plea is that when John Dowell, Jane Milligan, Paul Johnson, Simon Tapley, when all of you are meeting with more senior members of our health and social care system and Department of Health, etc., that we ask that we can move away from short-termism. This idea that actually we can give some money for 1 year, and as Andrew said, at the end of that year, we have 3 months where people don't know where their next funding's coming from, don't know where their job is coming from. It's impossible to run an effective, longer-term social system which is going to affect our local population if we go hand in mouth year on year. So my plea is that we use every opportunity to move to a system that allows us to have these funds moving year on year, or at least have an emotional and maybe a firm commitment that funding will be more than 1 year. Otherwise, I think we'll just go from pillar to post. So that's my plea to our leaders to take this to those above us.
Thanks very much, John. So John Dowell, if you want to respond to some of those, and then Simon, I'm sure will come in.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, and thanks for the questions. So just back, Nick, on the point about audit, just to sort of clarify that one, it's not an issue of approval that we're working through with them. It's one of accounting treatment. So it's a little bit on the technical end, if you like, but the sort of pivotal point is whether this is correctly recorded as expenditure in year, or to some extent a prepayment, because not all of the resources will have been deployed within the financial year that we're in. That's the point that we're just needing to get to agreement on, not one of approval per se. Those discussions are progressing well. I think Graham's introduction of we need to get to a satisfactory conclusion of that is the right one to go. So indicates that there is still some issues to work through, but reasonably confident about getting the right outcome on that. To the question about the QEIAs, I mean, certainly this funding is very much in the territory which should be helping us to think about things like health inequalities with some money to go behind it. So a QEIA type approach to the onward deployment of the resource is absolutely something that you'd expect to see in there, and I think would also support the value for money part of the discussion that we had before. David's question about is it different in?
Do you want me to do that one?
Please do, Simon. Thank you.
So I was just going to say, I think Judy, you mentioned that it was good to see these new flexibilities. Well, so sections 256 and section 75, which are the two main pooling funds regimes that we use, have been around for years. I feel slightly nervous because Graham sat there and he will know far more than I do about it, but we've been using 256 and 75 for quite a long time now. It is slightly different. David, I've lost you on screen. In Torbay, as you know, because of the risk share arrangement and the contract that we've got with Torbay and with Torbay local authority, so we don't use a 256 or a 75 down there. It's a longer term contract that we have with them, but the governance of it through the locality directors, which are joint appointments, is the same. So it's just a technical pooling arrangement that is slightly different, but these things have been around for a while. In terms of John Walmsley, that longer contract thing, so I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, that's why the last couple of procurements we've done have been 10-year plus 5-year contracts, haven't they? Because you only start to reap the benefits when you give some stability to providers to transform their services. So just we do it with the bigger contracts. We really need to get into the ones that need it the most, so that needs to be part of our provider development program. So I would completely agree with you. Sorry, John, is that okay?
Perfect, thank you very much.
Great, okay. Thanks.
I think that was all the questions, Paul.
Okay, thanks very much, John. So in light of that discussion, we are asked as a governing body to effectively, having reviewed them, to approve that they can be signed off by John as Director of Finance. So can I take it by exception? So hands up if you are not in a position where you feel able to support that proposal. Okay, John, then that's been agreed by governing body. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
So I'm just aware of where we are with time. Can I bring just the Winter Task Force briefing up, because it's helpful, because both Simon and I are part of that we cover that off before either of us have to go, and then we'll pick up the rest of the agenda as planned. So that's on page 235 onwards by my pack, and it is a summary of a lot of the activity that is happening within the Winter Task Force. Much of that has been reflected in the performance report and some of those questions and comments that a narrative that Darren has already supplied. So I guess, Simon, is there anything you want to particularly highlight? Otherwise, we will just pause to see if there are any questions or comments.
Yeah, I was just going to remind colleagues of the structure. So John Palmer, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Northern Devon, and RD&E and Mairead McLinden have been co-chairing the Winter Task Force. We've had a number of cells, so System Flow focusing on discharge, which I have chaired, Clinical Cell, which Paul has co-chaired with Adrian Harris from the RD&E, Primary and Community Care, which Joe Turl has been chairing on our behalf, and the Vaccination Cell, which, as you know, Darren has been chairing, and we've also had a comms cell. So a range of people feeding into the Winter Task Force. It's been meeting twice a week to try to stay on top of our surge planning, as I've said, System Flow, some of the difficult risk escalation issues that we've had. I think we've been fairly good at updating you on a weekly basis about how that's going and how difficult that's been, but happy to take any questions on the paper, which was written on the 19th of January, so you've probably had a further couple of updates since then, but happy to take any questions.
Any questions or comments from anyone? Okay. Thanks all. And actually, Simon, can you pass on governing bodies' thanks to everyone involved, because there's been a huge amount of work going into that in what's been some really difficult and challenging times, not just from CCG staff, but from our provider organisations as well. So if you could take that back to the Winter Task Force on behalf of the CCG, please. Okay, so let's move back to item 8.4. Darren, is this you presenting this one? This is about alteration of the financial limits in the CHC team, is that right?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I'll keep this very brief for timing. So in terms of in line with the standard financial instructions, we need governing approval, body approval for any changes in the CHC delegations. So based in terms of where we are at the market at the moment and the challenges in terms of current thresholds, we're asking for approval that we're not changing any of the current assurance processes, but for a slight uplift in each level. So from the band 7 practitioners through to the 8A, 8B, 8C, and then obviously on to the panel, which I know Sheila's very heavily involved in as well, to ask for uplifts in each of those. We're also going to add in an additional process where, particularly for example, where there are the two band 8A practitioner, we're requesting that they can approve what historically was a 1,600 limit to a 2,000 limit, but with 2 practitioners reviewing can then increase that to a 2,200. Yeah, the aim of this is one, so that we can make sure that we approve packages of care in a timely manner. I think what we've found, because of everything has gone up slightly in terms of capacity, that there has been a huge amount that has to go through the panel for sign off, which obviously is delaying, but also then making sure that we don't give enough timely scrutiny to those most complex cases, and ultimately a lot of individuals then being delayed because becoming to both to myself and John above the £5,000 per week. So it is an ask of governing body to approve uplifts. As I say, we are not changing any of those processes in terms of assurance and governance, but we're asking for changes to the limits. I'm not sure, John, Dowie, we don't add anything else from a finance perspective.
So, Darren, can I just ask in the paper, just clarification on numbers, because as you go over from the first page to the second page, you've got this line that says from 1,600 to 5,000, and then alongside that, then it's up to 2,200. So how do those two relate? And then it looks like the band 8C is reducing from 5,000 to 2,500. I'm not quite clear what those numbers represent.
Yeah, so that is we felt that there was an updated paper, so those elements should have been removed. So in clarity, so 8A would be, the extension at the moment is up to 1,600, but the aim is to go to 2,000, and then for the band 8B would be from 2,000 to go to 2,200, and the 8B, the 8C historically never had a £5,000 limit because that was always go through panel. So the ask is that goes to 2,500, and obviously anything above 2,500 would go to panel.
All right, sorry. So I've got a
you've got a slightly earlier version
in front of me. Okay, but thanks, Darren, for clarifying that for me. John.
Thank you, Chair. So this is Darren. This is our members of staff are approving funding for an individual case that's been assessed by a different organisation. Is that correct? They're not assessed by us. And if so, how assured are we that that assessment process is robust? And why I say that is sometimes we see on the front line that maybe the package, the final packages may be different to what we might have, as clinicians, might have thought was necessary. And if the assessment is done in hospital, when an individual is more dependent, that they appear less dependent than they would be if they were assessed at home in a more robust manner. So how assured are we? I fully approve. I know things become more expensive, but how assured are we that the assessment process is as robust as it should be?
Yeah, so we've got a discharge to assess process and we've got the quality assurance checker. So we ultimately have a number of check balances in this, as you quite rightly say, John. Potentially a discharge to assess should be reviewed at 6 weeks because the package may be slightly higher. at that particular stage. I think there are still some challenges in terms of timeliness of that quality assurance check, but ultimately, we're proposing that we're making those more robust to make sure that those balances.
I'm just thinking back sort of 6 years ago when we looked at this process and as New Devon CCG, and there were significant changes made on some of the packages year on year. So I think I'd request that we really are quite robust in making sure we've got this bit right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Absolutely noted, John. Thank you.
So Darren, maybe it's just helpful if we can just have a quick summary of what the review process is and the validation processes that you have in place within your teams. I think that just be helpful as a bit of assurance, given that John has raised that, and just to make sure that we close that off to governing body satisfaction. That would be helpful, please.
Yeah, happy.
Simon.
Yeah, Darren, it's the high cost packages. I put in the chat. It says you plus about 3 other people. It shouldn't all rest with you. What about when you're not here? So let's say 2 of, and I would remove the coup because we haven't got one. And I'm quite happy, given that I've done this before, to be added in there. I think we need probably 4 people there and 2 to sign it off, the high cost packages. But I think it just needs a little bit of a fiddle with the job titles.
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy with that, Simon, because it does sit quite a lot with myself and John Dowell at the moment.
Okay, so introducing that change, we'll come to an agreement if that exchange is included in a moment, but Simon Kerr first, and then we'll come back to that.
Just back up John Worms's point, really. We were at one point with New Devon, we had a risk around this CHC spend of about 25 at one point, because we were very high spending CCG compared with others across the country. It'd be just interesting to see where we're at now comparatively. So if you're producing some more information, Darren, it'd be really good to see how we benchmark with our CHC spend against other similar size organisations.
Yeah, no, I'm more than happy to bring that back. We have got the benchmark data from a regional perspective, so happy to share that.
Thanks, Darren. So if we include that change around VSM to include Simon supporting.
Oh, I think John is. Darren. I think Paul's. But you're frozen then, Chair.
As articulated in this paper. Okay. Any raised hands if you're unable to support that? Okay, then that is approved. Thank you very much. So we are now on to item 8.5. Can I just ask, just before we go to Lincoln, Graham, I'm going to say that the team who need to meet the regional team probably need to go at about 25 past just to get them in the right space for that meeting. And so if that happens, it may be useful if you could take over from after Lincoln's presentation, just so that we have a continuity and it's not too disjointed when people do head off, if that's okay.
Yeah, happy to do that. And can I just say that if my IT falls down, no doubt one of my non-exec colleagues will step into my place if needed.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much. Lincoln, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Great privilege just to introduce the summary report of what we've been doing in what is now the Health Inequalities Prevention Equally Well Anchor Institutions, and there's another bit that's been added on. It all fits together as one of the enabling work streams in the ICS as we go forward. I took over about a year ago from my colleague Caroline, who retired, and I just want to pay tribute to 3 people. Lots of people have been involved with this, but 3 who have left or will leave us shortly. The former chairs, Dame Susie Leather, Ginny Snaith, who has returned to her kind of day job, and Paul Hurrell, who has been an absolute anchor, who has been poached elsewhere. I want to express my own personal thanks to them and on your behalf for the incredible work that they've done to keep these agendas going. In terms of the achievements, a lot of those have come through the prevention work stream, which is the longest and most well established. There's a pot of money, which is a transformation fund. I was talking earlier about the funding that we've provided through that for infection control and prevention and other things. We've been able to leverage in an additional circa 600K for a number of projects, as you will see there, and I'm quite proud of the work that we've been doing. That does include, Alison, work on alcohol in Torbay. We've been able through that funding pot to put some emphasis into that key area as well. No surprise that the key challenges as we move forward are recognized by the system: data quality, the actionable data, as Bola, the National Director for Health Inequalities, often speaks of it, our ability to have the information that allows us to respond in a timely manner to some of the issues around recovering of waiting lists, etc. We have some good examples in terms of the COVID vaccine program, where we have been able to use data in real time to plan where we do pop-up clinics and particular focus to drive up attention and bring people forward. And we need to do a lot more of that if we're going to make a difference with some of our key pathways. We also recognize, and I think everyone, is it an American expression? I don't know, motherhood and apple pie. Everyone, nobody will say anything against promoting health inequalities, but we actually need to move beyond that to tangible work programs, and that is something that we all are responsible for. I was in the board for mental health, learning disabilities and autism, and I think it's important there around reasonable adjustments that we begin to think about which pathways are we working on, where we need to build into that architecture, fueled by our quality impact assessments. Which are those priority pathways that will make it better for the young person we talked about this morning, for people who are some of the most disadvantaged because they have a learning disability or autism, for example. And next year, I would want to see under our achievements that we're able to celebrate some of those tangible changes as we move into not only planning for, but actually delivering some of those inequalities agendas. You will see that we've also included some work that we've been doing with the local care partnerships. We did some work with them in terms of a self-assessment of their maturity, and most of them are at exploring or planning, and we would want to work with them over the next year to move some of those priorities into level 5 and 6. When we look at the priorities, the usual suspects are there. You would query, if you have very long lists of things, are they actually priorities? And I think we need to be thinking strategically about pick one or two, make some headway, and we can begin to share good practice where people have cracked some of these things. We can use that, use innovation approaches to, roll out and adapt for the other areas, for example. We have some good people now identified, and I'm confident that we have with the NED appointments, and particular, one of the things you will have noticed, the 3 NEDs that were announced will improve our diversity statistics. They are very good people for lots of other reasons, but it's great when we can have visible representation of our diversity as a community in our top leadership. And I think that will go very well for the credibility of implementing our NAS report, for example. And just to say finally that some of the key areas we've identified for actions in section 4 the QEIA process. We're revising that, hopefully to help us identify and move things forward. I talked earlier about the transformation fund that we're using and our ability to shift other things, including community infection control prevention, into the mainstream so that we can utilize that funding and leverage in more funding to continue the innovations that we have been that we have in train. So that's my introduction. If there are any questions or comments.
Thank you, Lincoln. Just as people gather questions, if I could say two things. Firstly, I'm sure the governing body will want to endorse, firstly, the thanks to you for taking on the leadership of this, but also for your colleagues that you mentioned as you spoke, who've done sterling work in the past. If I could just tease out one issue from you. Section 1.3 of your report on page 1 sets out pretty starkly that some of the worst outcomes for health inequalities are in Ilfracombe and Barnstaple. Indeed, 5 out of the 6 are in that area. John Womersley earlier used the phrase geographic inequity. Mm-hmm. When I then look at section 2.3 of your report, which talks about some of the successes, there's quite a lot there about Plymouth and about Torbay, and that's all excellent work, and I wouldn't want to decry it at all. It's all very valuable work. Mm. But I guess I just wanted to tease out whether we're doing enough, have enough in the programme for North Devon as we go forwards, and not just North Devon, for rural areas generally, alongside tackling the cities and the inner town issues. After you've answered that, we've got questions from John Womersley and from David.
Yes, really good. One of the slight challenges of joining in the last year is I've not been able to get out and about as much as I would have hoped. But John, I'm sure I'll be coming up to have a good view there. There's a lot going on. I think North Devon is in a good place. And I don't think the list here necessarily reflects the fullness of what we're doing. There's quite a lot that is happening in North Devon, some of which not necessarily through this pot, but through other resources. But you're right, we have the recent report from the All-Parliamentary Committee on Rural Inequalities. We have the Chief Medical Officer's report on coastal deprivation. We understand some of the urban issues. And I think having that flexibility of the different geographies that we're dealing with in Devon will be quite important. And that's where we look to the local care partnerships, because I think how we work with place and how we do things qualitatively different. So there are lots of things that I'm doing, but that we are doing in this program, but I'm passionate that things like the anchor institutions work remains a key focus, because I think that's what's going to make this ICS different to the other things that went before. And a lot of that is at place. So very much with those local care partnerships to do that translation of these broad programs into what does this mean in Ilfracombe, for example.
Okay, thank you, Lincoln. I'm going to bring John Womersley in next then, and then probably bring in together David Greenwell and Simon Kerr, who've both got their hands up. So John first.
Lovely. Yes, thank you, Lincoln. You're very welcome up here. The sun's shining, so we look forward to seeing you fairly quickly. Because the more we look at the data, the more we recognise that actually there are huge geographical inequities throughout Devon, and also Devon versus other parts of the country. So do you have a view on differential funding spend with the different LCPs? Because I think this is one area where the centre has to let go a little bit and leave this to place in its truest form, which for us will be LCPs and smaller, because locally we are the experts, and this does require funding. We can't do enough without making significant funding input into this. So my plea is that in some ways you let go a little bit and succeed responsibility and delivering outcomes to place. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, so I think there are probably two broad approaches to that. One of the things, the the funding that we have under our purview, quite a lot of it is committed to different things. When we free up, for example, community infection control prevention, about 400K, we can free that up. My view is that in some situations, we can use some of those deprivation matrices to kind of do a differential funding, and in principle, we've accepted that and doing some of it. The other corollary, there may be some things where we want to say, actually, the scale of challenge and the potential to change the overall statistics, we might want to give all of the money to a particular area. Does that make sense? So there might be some stuff where we say, actually, when we look across Devon and we look at a particular inequality type issue, we would get more by investing heavily in North Devon. Yeah, and we make a strategic decision to do that. You know, but clearly we'll have to do a mixture of both approaches.
My request would be that the system recognises we're probably not spending enough money in this on this subject, on what you're trying to do, because the sums of money that you mentioned, £600,000, they're simply not enough if we're going to have a significant impact. We need to be spending 10 times that probably if we're going to actually reduce spend on health and social care needs in 10 years' time. We need to spend much more now, and I know we've got immediate challenges, but it's difficult. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. We will return later on in the meeting to the financial challenges that we have overall. I'm going to take David and Simon together, and then we have a question from Nick, and I think I'd like to draw a line then, if we can, and move on to the next agenda item after that. So David and then Simon.
So I was just going to say that about 2 years ago, we did a major piece of work on equity of investment across Devon. And I would really like to see that piece of work overlaid across the piece of work, this piece of work, so that we can understand. We're talking about where we transfer investment to as if we already had equality of investment across Devon. And actually that piece of work demonstrated that we don't have that. And that actually, perversely, we spend less in some of the most deprived areas than we do in some of the most affluent areas. So actually, the starting point for this agenda may well be understanding why it is that we spend more in affluent, less deprived areas with better health outcomes than we do in the areas with poor health outcomes. And actually, rather than saying we should find a special pot of money to invest in areas with poor health outcomes, maybe what we need to do is just create equity. And actually, it may be much easier to tackle this agenda if we understood exactly where we spend our money and what the health outcomes are in those areas.
You make a really good point, David, and I know that report on equity of funding predated Lincoln joining us. So maybe we can just take it away as an action from today, that the executive bring back where we are on that report and remind us of what it said and what action's been taken as a result. But you're right to link the two together. Simon?
Yes, thanks, Graham. David, I think that's exactly the sort of intervention that we need in East, just to stimulate where we're at. And thank you, Lincoln, for pointing out we're at this planning stage where we've got our priorities, but actually we sit in our delivery group every week and I get frustrated to say, well, what are we actually going to do about them, and why haven't we got any actions, and why aren't we getting to that level 6 where we've got an action and we're actually investing in doing it? It's and that's the difficult bit, to move from level 4 to level 6. And I wonder whether, if you came to our meeting, Lincoln, what you would say, what extra information you would give us to enable us to really get things down on paper and do some actions. And it might be about actually painting a picture for East to say we're pretty well invested in already and we need to use the investments we've already got. It might be about we need to kind of explore small pieces of work to start off with and then build on those. It might be about we've got to have a realistic conversation with our colleagues across primary and secondary care and social care about, we've really got to pool our funds together if we're going to be allowed to. And that's, I think, the tension that we feel in the locality care partnership meetings about, actually, if we go ahead and do something, is somebody going to come along and say, actually, we don't want you to do this? Or is somebody happy with our priorities, and actually can we kind of press ahead and just get on and do something. I guess I'm frustrated in our LCP at the next step to get to 5 and 6.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, certainly, David, it'd be hugely helpful to see that report. And because really, if we're going to make a difference, as John said, it is using the whole spending power, not just of the NHS, but of the system. And you know, there are eye-watering sums of money that we spend on single pathways, you know, which is far more than the £1 million that we have in the prevention pot. So it's thinking about those. And I suppose, Simon, and I think what we want to try to do in the coming year with the new people coming into the program is then to work with you on whatever data and other information, because it's important. You probably have a good feeling without looking at any data or statistics as to where those opportunities are. And we just need then to say, you know, if it is that we're going to make a difference because, you know, there is an issue in terms of one or two of those priorities that you've identified, we just start work with our partners and crack it. Yeah. The other thing I would want to encourage, and I know when I sit in my own in South, it's easy for all the energy in an LCP discussion to be about our current firefights. Yeah. And we need to create some space to say, actually, the institutions working together can make fundamental changes through their recruitment policies, through their procurement, yeah, through promoting local businesses, those kinds of things. The anchor institutions badge is where I think we can make a huge difference, and where, in fact, across the piece, there are some really good examples of where people are making headway. And I think what we can try to do through the program is to connect up. We're doing that through the executive group of connecting up people so that, you know, we can talk to each other as part of that organizational development. You know, these are the challenges we face. These are people who have some good ideas. This is how you might implement some of that. So my plea is, yes, do the firefighting with the winter preparedness and all of that kind of stuff, but create some space to be thinking creatively about the things that are really going to make a difference.
Okay, thank you, Lincoln. I'll bring Nick in for a last question and then we'll move on.
Thank you very much, Lincoln. The QEIA process, obviously Devon does it very well. It's a really important part of the overall assurance process. You say that you're launching a revised process. So I wonder if you could just tell us what that entails and how we're going to be cited on that, and how you're going to bring in non-NHS organisations into that, because at the moment, so far as I'm aware, it's largely been an NHS process.
Yeah, good points. And some of it may still be, so I would say a staged approach. Some of it is simply making it a more user-friendly approach. We also want it to be less of a tick box type situation, but, you know, to work with you, to co-produce with you an approach that gets people really thinking about, you know, who are the groups and what might we do to mitigate or improve situations with them. Good point about how do we use that with the wider partners, and I think I'll take that back to the group and thinking about at an LCP level, how might we use that to do an assessment across the system as opposed to just looking at the NHS, because in some situations, if we're working in an integrated way, very often we do the piece for our organization, but then we don't take into consideration the knock-ons for other parts of the system. And
in many ways, that's the most important part of the QA, and that's where people learn the most, I would have thought.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll take those back as we go through that process.
Thank you, Lincoln, and just an extra thank you to John Womersley for the point made in the chat about need for action on the wider determinants of health. Just in closing this item, Nikki Coombs, in the absence of Jane, Simon and John Dowell, perhaps you could just pick up the point that we just discussed, the fairer funding report that we had, I think, a couple of years ago now, that looked at funding across Devon. If you could just draw that to the attention of the executives, please, as they're not here to have heard this discussion, not only to perhaps bring it back at some point, but to make sure that Lincoln has sight of it in the interim. So if we could, thank you, Nikki. If we could move then to item 8.6, I'm guessing, Piers, that you're going to introduce this item for us.
That's right. Thank you, Chair. I'm Piers Tetley. I'm the HR lead for the CCG, and I'm deputising for Andrew Millward, who's on leave this week. So yes, hopefully I can help you with the agenda as well in the interest of expediency, given the time. So we've just provided here the monthly copies of the monthly update that our comms teams are producing for our ICS partners and boards in particular, so that we get a consistency of information flowing between us. And these provide both January and February's updates and cover actually much of the things that we've had presented to us by Jane and Darren, and indeed Andrew Moorman earlier, right at the beginning of this session, about key things that are happening within our ICS, and Andrew covered really eloquently the pressures on our CAM services and services to children generally. So I don't probably need to say very much more than that. It hopefully provides helpful information on all the key areas. We're covering the ICS development, local care partnership updates, and the development of those. And of course, many of you be aware that the ICS development has now been, certainly the ICB creation has been delayed until the 1st of July. Rather than the 1st of April. And they were also providing things like an update on our elective recovery plan and digital developments. So I won't say any more than that, Graham, but happy to take any questions. I think you're on mute.
So I am on mute. I'm not now. Can I just ask if there are any questions or comments for Piers? I had one, Piers, if that's okay. It's in your paper, which is the second paper at 8.6. There's reference to exploring the feasibility of joint scrutiny committees, which I think is an excellent idea. Given my background, it's probably no surprise to know that I take great pleasure in reading the minutes of local authority meetings. And I was delighted to see that Torbay on the 9th of February supported the idea of a joint scrutiny panel. But it appeared to me that when Devon County Council met, it was rather less enthusiastic. And I note that Plymouth is still to meet on the 9th of March to discuss the idea. Have you any idea whether this is going to gather some sort of universal support at some stage, or can we do a little bit more work to encourage council members to step into this joint working?
Yeah, so we remain hopeful, Graham, and we'll continue to promote that concept, just as you've eloquently described. It's a really important area of development for us. So I can't give much more of an update than we've already had, but yeah, certainly we will continue to promote that idea, and equally positive about it ourselves.
It might be that individual governing body members have an opportunity to encourage council members to work jointly where that's the right thing to do, whilst retaining their own independent sovereignty, of course. So if there are no further questions for Piers, we've dealt with the next item, Winter Task Force briefing, so we can move on to item 9, the local care partnerships. Now, colleagues might want to help me here as to how we normally deal with these. Do we take these by exception, or do people introduce them and go through the reports? I think my memory is we take questions and issues by exception, don't we? So if we deal first with the southern locality, who's in a position to lead on that? David Greenwell?
So I don't think I've got the report is saying very similar things to previous months. Just bringing a couple of good pieces of news. Just the bit of work on high intensity users is a good news story, that by targeting the high intensity users of particularly emergency services, it is possible to reduce their dependence on A&E. It's quoted a 71% reduction in attendance, which is impressive. So just say that work is relatively small at the moment, but I think that is an indication that approach may make a difference. And just continuing work on discharge and support coordination is going to be a really important piece of work. And happy to take any questions beyond those two.
Thank you, David. Are there any questions for David? If not, we can move on to the Eastern area. Who'd like to lead on that? Is that Simon?
Yeah, it is, Graham. I guess I don't write this report anymore, so it would be just taking it as read, really, and I can hopefully try to answer any questions or take back any comments. I am aware that we are still working around the 5 thematic areas which are described in the report, and we are developing the Diabetic Transformation Programme as described in the report. We've spent quite a lot of time on the priorities that we discussed under Lincoln's item. And a lot of focus on discharge still, trying to move people through the system because of people in beds in the hospital who don't have that right to reside as we term that. But yeah, I'd just take any comments. I think, Graham, thank you.
Okay, are there any comments or questions for Simon? It doesn't look like it, does it? But the common theme coming through all these reports is the importance of dealing with discharge and dealing with emergency care at the other end, isn't it? Those two pressures on the system. Let's move on then to the northern locality. John Womersley.
Lovely, thanks. So like Simon, things have changed on local care partnerships, so we don't write these reports anymore. But I think our focus is actually on getting a local system working together. And including the voluntary sector, the police, the councils, NHS, social care, a whole system approach. And we now have our integrated delivery group, which is, I suppose, hardcore health and social care, and One Northern Devon, which is the wider determinants working with district councils, etc. So as like David, we have a high flow project looking at high intensity users. We've got the flow around the person. We've got community flow, where we have the communities involved in looking after individuals. We've got primary care flow. We have a multiple system now. So I'll take the rest of the report as read. But for me, the secret of an effective local care partnership will be moving beyond hardcore health and social care to the wider determinants. So any questions on the report or on anything else, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, John. We've got a question from Judy.
Okay, it's actually more a comment than a question, but I note that Anna Coles is on the call, and I assume she's come in because we're dealing with the locality issues. But at the bottom of the northern one, the talk, the support required or barriers to progress picks up issues about staffing. In the southern one, I know because I saw it in advance, it picked up the issue about access to data. So I think what we're seeing emerging here, and it's something we have been discussing at the transition group from CCG into the future, is the importance of giving support to localities. Just the last 2 or 3 discussions we've had, we've talked about, oh, this would be a role for LCPs, or LCPs are getting engaged in this. But it really is very important that we make sure that their resourcing needs in terms of staff and information, possibly finance, we just had a conversation about finance, are fully discussed, and perhaps that's an item to bring to the next governing body.
Thank you, Judy. Does that idea from Judy get support from colleagues? Am I seeing nods of heads? Yes, I think I am. That's good.
Chair, I think Simon Tapley's leading the development of LCPs. And I think everybody's at a different stage. I think we need to ask Simon what he feels an appropriate update would be, but because this is part of the ICS, and in some ways, some of those meetings are a little bit distant from what we're all doing. So I'd be keen that we involve Simon Tapley in what we bring back to the governing body.
Yeah, of course. Okay, thank you, John. John, just before we move on to Plymouth Next, if I could return to a hobby horse of mine on these reports, and I just wonder if there's any light at the end of the tunnel yet in respect of the minor injuries units in North Devon.
No, so they remain temporarily closed, and that's due to the staffing crisis created by COVID, and the staff moved into NDH teams, into the acute unit. I think there are meetings being planned, and we meet on a regular basis. I think the next 6 months will show us how we can better staff those units. So no answer yet, but it is an ongoing agenda item in our locality.
Thank you, John. I'm just struck by the phrase in the report about the continued closure leading to mistrust amongst local people.
Yes, so Ilfracombe is one of the temporarily closed units, and people always fear, and partly it's borne out by experiences, that actually if a unit closes temporarily, it doesn't reopen. I think we all need to recognise that the way services are delivered changes over time. And that we need to make a calm, objective assessment of what's going to be the best way to deliver care in the next 5 to 10 years. And if that means that a unit is not the best way to do it, then we need to be honest with the public about that, and we would intend to be that.
Absolutely, it's about being honest and open and transparent, isn't it, about those discussions, given what we were talking about earlier regarding health inequalities. Can we move on then to Plymouth? I'm not sure who's going to introduce this. Is this Anna?
It is indeed Anna, because we did have a request that the locality directors would come and deliver these reports. And so, Anna, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Sheila.
Thanks, Sheila, and thank you, Chair. So I'll clearly take the report as read, but just I think helpful just to highlight a couple of areas. So I think, like all other localities, the Plymouth and West Devon locality have been focused on discharge flow significantly over the last month, and every effort underway across both health and social care to support our acute trust, I think has been a significant deployment of the team in that respect. Some good news in terms of some additional capacity that's come into the Plymouth system, in particular in the area of dementia step down capacity. So 16 beds opened locally on the 16th of February. So we were really delighted with that. I think workforce is a key pressure, and I think Judy's right to draw our attention to, I think all of the locality reports talk about staffing. So clearly there's something in terms of staffing from an ICS LCP perspective, but I think workforce more generally, and I think the work that certainly we're doing across the locality, and in fact across all localities, because whilst I represent one, I know that if Tim and Derek were here, they would be saying exactly the same thing, Chair. You know, how we secure the workforce of the future in terms of frontline health and social care staff to deliver more capacity out into our communities is absolutely key. So just from a Plymouth perspective, we're launching in March a real focused student recruitment campaign to see how we can attract students from City College and from the university into the intermediate care and domiciliary care workforce. We've got circa about 560 vacancies in that part of the market at the moment, and we're seeing a 13% turnover. So clearly we need to look at how we bring in that workforce. And then finally, I'm going to end on good news, which is in March, we're opening our William and Patricia Venton Centre. This has been a fantastic piece of partnership work between ourselves as a CCG, the local authority, Age UK and Live Well South West, and it will deliver 24 intermediate care beds into the system for short-term rehabilitation from hospital discharge, but I think also really importantly for step-up support in our community as well as part of our admission avoidance agenda. So happy to take any questions in terms of the report, but thank you very much for the time this morning to join you.
Thank you, Anna. And if I could just take the hint from Sheila, I do need to apologise. I should have said at the start of this item that both Tim Golby and Derek Blackford are on leave, are unable to be here to present their reports. So my apologies. I should have made that clear. And Anna, thank you for being here. Any questions to Anna? Anna, did you want to also talk about the West area?
So
we have a separate.
Yep. So in terms of the West Devon, so this has been prepared by Emma Hurd, the team. So I think when we look at Plymouth and West Devon, we're trying to join together those areas that it makes sense. and so that we're not duplicating in terms of the reports and the time here. But I think certainly if Emma was here today, she would be highlighting, as Judy's picked up, some of the challenges in terms of data for the West Devon LCP footprint, and how challenging that then is in terms of planning and coordinating offers and provision moving forward. You'll see within the report that clearly the LCP in West Devon is starting to develop now, and I think we should feel reassured by that, because it's probably our LCP that requires a little bit more nurturing than maybe some of our other LCPs across the system. But certainly we're at a place now under leadership that we're getting better engagement in that space, and that feels really positive. So I don't think I've got anything else that I draw people's attention to, Graham, but again, happy to pick up any questions around the West Devon element.
Thank you, Anna. Sheila, is there anything you would wish to add on this report? No? Okay. Are there any questions then for Anna? I'm not seeing any. So thank you, Anna, again for attending and giving us a comprehensive report. I think we can move on to item 10, which is the Assurance Committee reports. The first one is finance, so that's just down to me to just say a few words about, if I can, really just to take the report as read. There were 2 items referred to governing body by Finance Committee, one of which we've dealt with. It was the Section 256 agreements, and that's been dealt with separately on the agenda. The second item just was around risk 160, which is a new risk that's been added to the Finance and Performance Committee. This is around the 2022-2023 operational plan, where it's clear that there is a risk of a failure to meet our financial duties if we're unable to meet financial balance that's in that plan. That clearly could cause some reputational damage, but also have an impact on our exit from SOF 4. And I guess that's why those colleagues who have left the meeting for a meeting with Elizabeth are probably discussing those very same items as we meet now. Finance Committee wanted just to draw governing body's attention to that risk, which is particularly heightened because, of course, we have to make 6% efficiency savings in our budget for 22-23, which is £128 million. 6% doesn't sound much, does it? But £128 million does sound rather a lot. And so we have to put that in the balance against all the other exciting things we've talked about today, where we wish to spend more money or move resources and do really worthwhile initiatives. So that was really just for noting. Are there any questions at all on the Chair's report from Finance? No, I'm not seeing any. So the next item is the Chair's report from Primary Care. Judy?
Nothing to add, but happy to answer questions.
Any questions for Judy? No. And then the final one is quality, which I think would normally be Glynis, but I think Gaynor, you chaired the Quality Committee at its last meeting. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah, I did. So just briefly I'll take it that everyone's read the paper. Just one item to raise to governing body was around the eating disorders service. We now have oversight of the risks from the commissioning committee as that's been stood up. So we're looking at their risks, and the eating disorders risk had reduced. And within the committee, we had concerns around this, why it had been reduced, because there is a gap in the commissioning of these services. So really what I'm bringing to the governing board really is an action that we get a response of why that has been reduced. But what we're going to do to just counteract that in the meantime is it's going to be a new risk that will be added to the Quality Assurance Committee for us to keep oversight as well.
Okay, thank you, Gaynor. Any questions for Gaynor or comments on that matter? No, so that's all good, thank you. That brings us, I think, to the conclusion of the public meeting. So can I just thank everyone who's attended today, particularly Andrew Morman, who set us off to a really good start with the discussion on Young Devon. We are due to close this meeting now and have a private governing body meeting, which is due to start in about 30 seconds. Can I perhaps just to suggest to colleagues that we take a 5-minute break